Check, 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 check. Is that okay? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? My name is Mitch, and I am a grateful believer in Jesus Christ who is in recovery from drugs and alcohol and a whole laundry list of stuff. I'll just say a quick prayer. Lord, first and foremost, I wanted to say thank you for your grace, your love, your mercy. And if anybody gets one thing out of my testimony tonight, would they understand that no matter how many times we blow it, that you're always there to take us back, God. And I just want to say thank you for that. And I love you. Amen. And yes, I'm getting older, so. Okay, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. That's James 1, 2, and 3. My name is Mitch, and I'm a very grateful believer in Jesus Christ who is in recovery from addiction, alcoholism, compulsive overeating, and have recently gotten out of denial regarding a few issues with codependence. Hi, Mitch. I do accept full responsibility for every bad choice and behavior that I have carried out. My life started in Hayward, California in 1969, where I grew up with a father, mother, a sister, and a brother. My parents are still married today, and they have been for over 50 years. That means a lot to me. I was born with ADHD, and in the 1970s, this was not handled properly due to a lack of awareness. ADHD is a constant challenge to work through. Anybody who has it knows what I mean. If you want to learn, I would ask that you research what children and adults with ADHD experience. How does a 5-year-old cope with a mental disorder that nobody knows anything about? I had no idea what to do with myself. Unfortunately, I got labeled as being a troubled kid. Making friends was hard, and being made fun of was the norm. As a child, if I was able to sit through the kindergarten story, the teacher would put me up in front of the class and have the whole class clap for me. Those actions made me feel strange because nobody else was being put up in front of the class and clapped for. One day when I was about 6 or 7 and I was out riding my bike in the apartment complex that we lived at, I was lured into a large hollowed out pine tree that was like a clubhouse on the inside. The 2 teenage girls decided they would pick me to show me what the birds and the bees were about. I remember it as if it was yesterday and how shocked and scared I felt. How does a 6-year-old with a mental disorder cope with the feelings associated with such an act? In my head, it was just more confirmation that something was wrong with me. I always felt like an odd kid, sort of like that square peg trying to fit into a round hole. I just did not feel as if I fit in with anyone. I was in turmoil in my head and did not know how to cope with any of it. Nobody really talked about God in my home. What I knew as God was a priest who would talk from behind a mesh screen that I was somehow supposed to be honest with and tell him all the bad things I did and go on my way. And also a nun in the class that would chase me around with a ruler. I do remember her getting very angry because she could not catch me. Unfortunately, I have negative memories of my dad drinking beer and smoking cigarettes before I would go to school, as that is when he got off work due to working the graveyard shift. And the only time that seemed like that I would get any attention from my father is when he was spanking my bare bottom with the leather belt for 30-minute long sessions. I would get 3 to 4 hard cracks, and then he would talk for a few minutes, and the cycle repeated. I do remember my mother yelling at my dad for spanking me so hard. Consequently, also as a boy, I never heard those words, "I love you," from my father. There was no affection displayed between my parents or to us children. The first time that I changed the way I felt with a substance was from smoking a Pall Mall non-filter cigarette at the age of 8. Yeah, that was fun. At age 9 or 10, I started hanging out with much older boys, as this is when I smoked weed for the first time and I drank alcohol. Suddenly, I did not feel like such an oddball as all the substances took effect. I finally felt like I belonged someplace. I would get alcohol poisoning at the age of 12 as well. By the age of 13, I went to a small Baptist church school where the teacher, I don't remember the instance, but the teacher threw me up the wall one day, and I told my dad about it, and they took me out of that school. I went on to public middle school, where I would still get into trouble and get suspended for things like fighting in class. Sadly, I do remember breaking a kid's nose, and he had to have reconstructive surgery to repair it. The kid had poked my chest, and after several more times, I warned him not to do it again. He did it again, and I reacted with punches to his face. This is how I would act, being fearful and it would turn to anger at the snap of a finger. I've never had trouble standing up to bullies and protecting myself, and I would also protect the weaker kids from bullies as well. Again, it was out of fear that I did these things. Also, while in middle school, my cousin Richard, who was more like a brother to me, he died at the age of 13. I felt lost and I did not know what to do. I would drink and use substances to fit in and learned how to numb the pains of my life. When I got to high school, the drinking and drugs became almost a daily occurrence. I was arrested for the first time at 15 years old for possession of stolen firearms with an intent to sell. I spent 30 days in a maximum security at juvenile hall. This was a start to my criminal activity based around obtaining and using substances. I tried to hide behind sports to fit in, and it helped me to feel accepted. I excelled in football. I played both ways, did most special teams, kicked field goals, and other things. I would look into the crowd to see if my dad was at the games. I do remember seeing him 1 or 2 times for a very short period, and then he would be gone as he had to go to work. I felt as if I was not good enough for my father's love. I had many sexual encounters from the age of 13 to 23, and I got 3 different girls pregnant by the age of 19, 2 of which had abortions. The thought of being involved in the taking of an innocent life haunts me to this day. I cannot help but wonder what they would look like and what kinds of adults they would have turned out to be. At age 19, I went into my first rehab. I got out and I failed miserably as I was not ready to change. I was in denial about having a problem. I ended up homeless and on the streets, living in my car. I met up with an old girlfriend, and this is at the age of 19, and Michelle had my oldest daughter, Brianna. After a 3-year violent relationship with Brianna's mom, I wanted out, and Michelle told me that if I did not marry her, I would never see my child. I told her that I would not marry a violent woman. Michelle moved 5 times over the next few years, but not without me tracking her down every time. I wanted to see my daughter, but Michelle would not let me see her, and she also would refuse child support from me. Michelle told me that if she took my support, she would have to let me see my daughter. I had joint legal and physical custody, but that made no difference. And when my daughter was 3, Michelle abducted her, and I still have no relationship with her to this day. I've tried to get to know her, but it is in God's hands, as Brianna wants nothing to do with me. By the age of 23, I got myself into all kinds of trouble. I was on probation in 3 different counties, in and out of jail a whole bunch of time, and I was headed to prison. I was in court for a violent probation violation offense, and it was 1993, and at the age of 24, the judge stuck me into solitary confinement out at Santa Rita. And the judge told me before I went in that if I as much spit on the sidewalk when I got out, that I would get 5 to 10 years in prison. After thinking long and hard, locked in a cell all alone, I knew that I needed to change my life, but I did not know how that was going to be possible. After reading a beat-up old book held together with rubber bands, written by Billy Graham called Peace with God, I answered a chapel call one day. I went to the chapel and I received a message that I took very seriously. I cried out to Jesus and I was saved by my Lord that day at the chapel in Santa Rita. I felt something come over me as if it washed me off. I cried for over an hour and a half like I never had before. I truly was delivered of smoking, drinking, using meth, cursing, fighting, and most of my old habits were wiped completely clean. My mom was actually shocked to see the new me when I got out, and she knew that Jesus had got hold of me. I would not drink, use, or hardly curse for the next 7.5 years. When I got out of jail, I had a friend call me, and he notified me that a girl that I had slept with and I shared needles with had died of AIDS. I was scared to death, and I went through the next 1.5 years of getting tested to see if I contracted the virus. God spared me once again, and I was clear and free of HIV. I started attending church hard and heavy, and that is where I met my wife at East Bay Faith Center. We were married in 1994, and we had 2 wonderful kids. I was holding down a good job and was doing okay, but I stopped applying God's principles, and I was running on self-will. I went to church most of the time, but I was not doing much else to be of service or serve God. I dropped my power source and I was relying on only myself, and without the help of Jesus, I lacked the power to be who he and my fellow man need me to be. How can I be of maximum service to the Lord if I do not do the work he expects? For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. That's James 14:26. I was in a motorcycle crash in 2001, and I started taking pain pills, and a sleeping dragon was awakened. I would become heavily addicted to Oxycontin muscle relaxers, and I started drinking again as well. After several work injuries, the pain medication would go on for 7 more years. I became heavily depressed and full of self-pity. No matter how hard I tried to confess and pray my emotional struggles and addictions away, get prayed for, and ask God to take it from me, it would never happen. I would never admit that I had a problem. I was just wanting that quick fix like I got back in Santa Rita in 1993. Being heavily addicted to the Oxycontin and alcohol in 2005, a pastor, a friend, and my wife did an intervention on me, and I went into a treatment center for the second time in my life. I got out and I did okay for a while, but I did not work the steps that God laid out for me, and I went back to what I knew. Once again, I was not relying on God. I started using again, and I got kicked out of my house. The cycle repeated itself, and after I moved back in again, I was kicked out and I got separated from my wife and kids one more time. And in 2007, I would seek help once again, and I started attending Celebrate Recovery at Neighborhood Church and Big Valley Grace. I started intimately connecting with God, working through the steps in a step study. I got involved working the steps with an accountability team, a sponsor, and I experienced a lot of internal change at that time. I met men that I still talk to today. A few are David F. and David G. I love you guys. And I have many other brothers that I love too. Thank you for coming and supporting me. I have finally met people I knew were like me, and above that, I began to get as honest as I could at the time. We shared secrets with one another. I shared some, but not all. I found out the hard way that keeping secrets can and do keep you sick. You can't heal a wound by saying it's not there. Jeremiah 6:14. In recovery, it is imperative to be honest, but particularly at the 4th and 5th steps, as these were the most difficult for me. I felt guilt and shame regarding the sexual abuse and sexual acts I carried out, and I had trust issues due to all the abuse I had suffered. It is vital to be rigorously honest, to continue the same level of honesty for all of the steps. Please do not hold onto any secrets, as they will keep you in bondage. God takes me through things that I cannot understand to bring me where he needs me to be. I finally fully accepted that I'm an addict and an alcoholic, and I cannot do recovery alone. I now have a full knowledge of my addictions and compulsive behaviors. I need to always be reminded of where I came from. First, I need Jesus every day, not just when I get in a pinch. And next, I need other people to hold me accountable. I was working on my marriage and treating my wife the way she deserves, but I started to let up on working my program. There must be a balance in life, and recovery must come first. I'm a very stubborn, hard-headed person. Again, I started to veer away from God's principles, and I thought I could handle life on my own once again. This is a great example of why I need to always admit I will struggle with addiction and other character defects. I claim spiritual progress, never spiritual perfection, and will never be cured of my compulsive behaviors. When a personal issue in my marriage had surfaced, I became fearful, resentful, and then angry. Or it should be the other way. I became fearful, angry, and then resentful. And when that happens, I become vengeful and want to cause harm when I'm not maintaining my spirituality through recovery work. Who am I to get so justified in my anger after all the harm I caused for so many years? As an addict and alcoholic, I can justify anger when I'm not spiritually fit. The saying is true that hurt people hurt people. The fears, resentments, selfishness, self-delusions, and self-centeredness are all glaring character defects that require daily prayer and allowing God to help me. I like to give up things and take them back at times. Had I been doing what I learned, I would have never let the fears turn into anger, which then turn into the resentments, and then become self-justified righteous anger and self-pity. If I would have called my sponsor or other accountability people, I would have been better off, but I chose to use my heart as a guide rather than practice the principles and forgiveness. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who could know it? Jeremiah 17:9. I would start to use alcohol again, and after drinking heavily in November 2014, I ended up getting a DUI. I reached that spot of pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization once again. I had to have my wife and son come at 1:30 in the morning to get my truck on the night before my son's first football game of his senior year. As they pulled up, I was sitting on the bumper of the cop car in handcuffs, and once again, I harmed those who I love the most. I would still drink for another 4 months after the DUI, but I knew things had to change. I returned to Celebrate Recovery and Alcoholics again in March 2015, and I met the man who is still my sponsor today. Larry, thank you. I would go the next 2 years completely sober. I got injured working and ended up having a total shoulder replacement surgery. Once again, I stopped talking to my sponsor and working the steps, and I would end up addicted to the pain medications. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Proverbs 26:11 says, like a dog that returns to his vomit, so a fool repeats his folly. In August of 2018, my wife would find me almost dead from a heroin overdose on the bathroom floor. My wife, who would not normally stay home from work on a Tuesday, decided out of the blue that she did not feel like going to work that day, and she found me minutes away from death. Had she gone to work, my son would have found me dead when he got home from work. To me, these are known as Godcidents. I do not believe such events are mere coincidences. Pitifully and incomprehensibly demoralized once again, and this time waking up in the ICU with tubes coming out of my throat and strapped to the bed with IVs in both arms. My family and friends were there all around me wondering if I would live. This I thought would be a wake-up call, and one would think that such an event would wake anyone up from themselves, but I kept using the opiates after I got home. Addiction is cunning, baffling, and powerful. In a moment of clarity, I heard that still small voice tell me it is time to get on the right path. So I started to cut back and taper off the pain meds to avoid being crippled from the sickness of the withdrawal. And I have been free of the opiates since January of 2019. And yeah, thank God. So that is my new sobriety date, but I have not touched alcohol since March of 2015. I would end up almost dying again in January 2019 from not watching my blood sugars. Am I sick or what? I was overeating sweets coupled with catching a virus that turned to pneumonia, and the combination of all of these things pushed my blood sugars to 650. I woke up at 3 a.m. and I was paralyzed and I could hardly move. The doctor said that had I waited much longer, I would not be here today. God saved me once again. I do give new meaning to the word powerless. I have fully surrendered to God in recovery. I went to the doctors and I told them I can never have opiates again, which is a huge step of faith to go red flag myself. I need this as another form of accountability. I'm done relying on my self-will, keeping secrets, and having reservations. I also started eating healthy most of the time and will begin slightly exercising soon. I have a lot of fear of being hurt while working out. So I don't do anything halfway, man. I'm like full bore. Steps 8 and 9 tell me that I get to make amends for all the harm that I have done to anyone, no matter how big or small. Step 10 says I get to continue to make amends anytime I do or say something that is harmful to another person. The biggest amends that I can make would be to live out the rest of my life sober, die peacefully and usefully whole while helping others as God intends. As an addict and an alcoholic in recovery, if I lose contact with God, the guilt and shame can eat me alive on the inside. If I allow, I can be my own biggest nightmare. As stated in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, I have a daily reprieve that's contingent upon the maintenance and I believe the enlargement of my spiritual condition. I can do this through the working of the steps. Through some hard lessons, many chances, fully surrendering, and step work, my broken thinking has been changed for God's glory. When life shows up, and it will, I can rely on Jesus, my sponsor, my accountability brothers, fellow addict alcoholics, and friends at church who God put in my path to support me. To maintain my sobriety and continual growth, I am in service. I do the CR Inside ministry. I chair AA and CR meetings. I also do H&I meetings for AA. I volunteer with the counseling ministry at Big Valley Grace. I sponsor others to the best of my ability, and I'm also an intern at the Modesto Gospel Mission. Thank you. I will continue working with other people to help them, and I will also continue to share my story. I just finished what is my 5th step study, and I jumped right into the 6th. The Celebrate Recovery program helps to develop, Celebrate Recovery and AA help to develop new relationships while continuing to build up support teams. This is outdated, but I just finished my bachelor's degree in human services management, and I graduated with a 3.85 GPA. And I actually made it to the dean's list, which is, I don't even know how I got there. The plans are to start the master's program and become an addiction specialist with a master's in addiction studies. My dream is to have a nonprofit someday for runaway and homeless teenagers, which will happen if it is God's will. There is a God in heaven, and he loves us all. God does for me what I cannot do for myself, which are things like getting up in front of people and sharing this stuff. He is especially faithful when I seek him, asking for his help to be free of my fears and other defects. Step 11 says, sought through prayer and meditation to maintain conscious contact with God, praying only for the knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. That step is also especially important to me because a lack of conscious contact means I am relying on self-will. By planning only 24 hours at a time, asking God daily, as many times during the day as needed for him to help direct my thinking, recovery and life are manageable. I thank the Lord for my never quit and tenacious personality. By continuing to focus on what I can do for others, continual growth are the results. If I am thinking of others, I have less of a chance of being selfish, and it also reminds me to ask God, who might I help and to be of service to today. These are the times that I meet the Lord in the sunlight of his Spirit. One thing I know for sure, that God has a plan for me, and he really wants to see that fulfilled. That is how much he loves me. Part of his plan is for me to give back of what has freely been given to me. This is a requirement of step 12. Jesus sent me an angel to watch over me, and she's my wife of 25 years. I love you, Cindy. And I'm grateful that the Lord has blessed me with you as a partner. Cindy, you and the kids have been through so much more than you deserve. I love you, Brittany and Zachary, and I'm proud to be your dad. Recovery has truly changed and saved my marriage. In time, God can repair the damages, and in many ways, he already has. Allow me to explain an analogy. When the family is destroyed by a tornado like me, through the amends process, it can take many years to repair the destruction, and consequently, some parts may never be repaired. But Jesus will repair the parts of my life that need to be. I will continue to do my part, and I know Jesus is faithful to do his. I never want to forget what God has brought me through, so I will never stop admitting I am powerless over such things. I feel extremely blessed because so many alcoholics, addicts, and compulsive overeaters do not live long to tell their story, and they do not get the many chances that I have. I truly believe deep in my soul that God did not do another divine intervention and deliver me like he did that day in Santa Rita, because he wanted to teach me how to surrender and fully submit to him. This is so a slow learning process could take place regarding how beautifully the steps of recovery work. I pray that everyone can come to understand what I have come to understand, but that they may not suffer the heartache and cause the damage that I have. Thankfully, God never wastes a hurt. Being confident of this very thing, that he who has begun a good work in you will complete it until the day of Jesus Christ, Philippians 1:6. To anyone new, returning, or been here for a while, never give up on yourself, because God will never give up on you. If you are new and find those stinking thinking habits returning, get into a step study, get a sponsor, take their suggestions as if your life depends upon them, work the steps, and never stop. The Celebrate Recovery program is designed to be done with other like-minded people and for the rest of our lives. Nobody graduates from being a human. Right? There's no place on the planet like AA and CR. My name is Mitch, and I'm an extremely grateful believer in Jesus Christ, who is in recovery from addiction, alcoholism, compulsive overeating, and as hard as this is for me to admit, a touch of codependence. Thank you for letting me share.
Give him a hand. All right. That's a great story. Story of redemption, reconciliation, and restoration. And Mitch, thank you for sharing it. I get a lot out of this guy from his sharing. He's got a lot of wisdom. Give him another hand. As always, if you bump into him tonight, next week, make sure you give him an encouragement. That's what we're all here for, to encourage each other on the journey called life together. Let's close with the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy forever next. Amen. Go to group, first time guest.